Hi there. Welcome back to Kevin Kearns Always Pick Last. We are on chapter 10 now. Okay. For the entire weekend, I felt better than I'd felt in a very long time. Dad's advice, just punch them in the nose, was sounding better and better. I'd managed to best Tony, but he hadn't done anything yet in retribution. I ate better and slept better than I had in the past 6 months. The next school day saw me once again trampled and pummeled. My triumph hadn't lasted very long at all. Mr. Lewin's algebra class was on the second floor of the junior high school, and I had just gotten to the top of the stairs when both Dawn and Dave suddenly appeared with Tony behind them, surprising me. They had let out an ugly roar of laughter as they grabbed my books, notebooks, and tossed them all the way down the stairs. As I turned around and I lunged to try and see if my homework, one of them gave me a great shove and I fell down the 13 stairs, feeling every single one of them with various parts of my body. The physical pain fell into the category of something I knew how to handle. It was the taunting, the laughter, the ridicule that hurt so much. I've been told all my life sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I'm here to tell you that whoever made that up had never been humiliated by the entire student body of their school. Everyone just stood where they were until I opened my eyes. Okay, so I wasn't dead or bleeding, so they all just returned to what they were doing, and I lay there on the landing, papers all around me until the bell rang. The doors above me slammed shut, and I were enveloped in a dusty silence. Gingerly, I rolled to one side and pushed myself up. I'd be back black and blue by tomorrow, but there didn't seem to be any really serious injury. What I couldn't believe is that absolutely no one had come to my aid. Not one single person asked if I was okay. No one protested when my books and papers had been tossed into the stairwell. My triumph over Tony had been very short lived and likely a stupid move on my part. Now, he knows he can best me using karate. He's taken he's taken to using a couple of big guns to his dirty work. Don and Dave were both significantly bigger than most of the kids in my class, and they scared me. I was still one of the scrawniest kids in school, and definitely no match for them. I knew I should have picked up my books and papers and been marked tardy for class, but I just couldn't face the jeers, the smirks, and the whispers. I knew I knew you were waiting for me in algebra class. For the first time in my life, I left school early and without permission. Mom worked as a secretary for the truant officer, so this was kind of a big deal for me. If I got picked up for skipping school, it could look bad for her. But today, I just didn't care. It was only one class. It's not like I'd be reported for skipping school for last period. I walked home as slowly as I possibly could. This was one time when I didn't feel I had to check around every corner before taking any particular route because I knew my three biggest tormentors were safely tucked away with Mr. Lewin. It was probably the freest 45 minutes I'd spent. I didn't exactly go home right away. I just wandered, hanging out here and there until school let out and the streets became noisy, with kids walking home from school. From my protected spot behind a tree, I saw Tim Cross heading home. If there was anyone who was smaller than I was and picked on even more than I was, it was Tim. I really don't know what happened to me, but it's like something inside of me just snapped. As he came along the tree, I jumped out at him and laughed when he dropped his books. It felt good. A sense of power I had over the other last pick of the neighborhood. In the back of my mind, though, I knew what I was doing was wrong. But that didn't stop me from taking a stance and then shooting my foot out in front, kick in a front kick towards his stomach. He folded in half exactly as I'd expected. What I didn't expect was him grabbing my ankles from his position on the ground and wiping me out. I put my elbow into his spine. By now, he was really giving me a fight. I don't know how, but he managed to move in such a way that my elbow popped into his elbow, connected with my eye. There had been no yelling or shouting. Our entire skirmish had been accomplished with soft grunts and growls. Tim backed away from me, picked up his books, and then ran away. Touching my tender eye, I knew I would end up with a shinner. Okay. Idiot, what was that all about? You're not supposed to pick on other people. He's another you. How stupid could I be, honestly? Then I imagined what Paul Taylor would say if he had ever found out that I'd used my few weeks of karate training to eat up another kid. I felt lower than dirt. It was at that moment I realized that I had to control my temper, which is something Paul really stressed during our classes. This was going to be one of my most difficult tasks because even now, as sore and as bruised as I was, my temper was still red hot. When I got into the house, I started punching the wall in the hallway. One hit, then another, sorry, and another. I kept it up until my knuckles were raw and bleeding. I felt a little better, but it was going to be a little hard to explain to my mum why there were dents in the wallboard. The next karate session, I walked into the dojo with a new sense of humility. I felt like I should tell Paul what I'd done, but there was never a moment when I could do it. So instead, that room with the panel walls and a red carpet became my sanctuary. I knuckled down and did everything Paul told me to do. I learned from him that if I failed at something, it wasn't a failure. He'd just look at me and say, okay, then try again. And I would. I would do it again and again and again. It didn't matter if it was a stance, a kick, a punch, a block. I would do my moves over and over until I had them absolutely perfect. Perfect. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had some kind of control over my body. I earned my orange belt pretty quickly, and I was pleased with my success. But that wasn't enough. I wanted more. Each belt progression required more knowledge, more abilities, with the pinions, kicks, and punches, blocks increasing in difficulty. Paul would explain exactly how to do something. Lift your leg like you're lifting it over a bicycle, then snap and spin out. That was a difficult kick for me. But with Paul's continued encouragement, the training became so ingrained I could almost do this move and the resulting katas in my sleep. Before too much time had passed, I was taking karate 3 days a week and getting progressively better. I also became better at incorporating discipline, honor, self control, and character in my life. I had nothing when I started at the karate studio except a burning desire to learn. What I got out of learning martial arts was self esteem, and I began to make friends. Tommy Spellman was one of my friends at the dojo. He was a little younger than I was, but had been taking karate for a couple years already. Instead of rubbing it in my face that he knew more than I did, he'd just encouraged me. Showed me in slow motion how to do certain moves so that I was more graceful in my transitions. He was always sick with massive allergies, but that never stopped him from training. He'd cough and sneeze and keep right on training. His example inspired me to train even when I didn't particularly feel like it. Another friend I made was Bobby Carbone, who I learned to call Church because he would frequently wear a train engineer hat. He was a green belt when I started at the dojo, and he too took me under his wing. They both showed me what to do and what not to do. For the first time in my life, I was in a place where I wasn't judged and found wanting. It was really different for me. In the dojo, we were taught to bring other students up and along and to never make fun of someone else. As I'd seen, as I'd seen with Tony, behavior like that earned immediate expulsion from the studio. The dojo was where I learned that there were places in this world where people weren't there to make you feel bad. They were there to make you feel good. Well, it wasn't a team sport, it was a team effort in bringing everyone along. We were all individuals, and as individuals, we helped one another get better. Here was where my emotional maturity began to develop. I learned what my parents had tried to teach me, but because I hadn't found a way to believe in myself yet, their efforts weren't quite enough. By Thanksgiving, I'd found something to be thankful for. I was eager to share it with Aunt Dee and Uncle Henry. It wasn't terribly unusual for us to go to their house for Thanksgiving. So for the first major holiday after Dad's death, being with them made it more bearable than if we just stayed at home. Auntie cooks as well as some of the great chefs. I know, and walking into their home, smelling the turkey, the onions and sage, with the sweet undertone of sweet potatoes and pumpkin pie, the aromas seemed to embrace me. Mum and Jean, arms loaded with food, had it right for the kitchen, but I went into the living room where Uncle Henry was turning on television to get ready for the first football game of the day. Hey, Kevin. He hugged me and gestured for me to come sit down with him. We hadn't talked much since he'd taken me to the dojo to sign up for my first karate lessons. How's the karate going for you? Where did I start? I'm sure my big grin gave him the answer he was looking for, but I needed to let him know just what a difference it had been in my life. It's great. I'm already an orange belt and I'll be tested for my yellow belt before Christmas. Uncle Henry didn't know anything about karate, but he listened and smiled at my obvious enthusiasm. We talked for a bit about what I was learning, and I could tell he liked hearing that I was making new friends at the dojo. And how are things going with these other kids who have been pestering you? He didn't come right out and call them bullies, but we both knew who he was talking about. They're still around. I did manage to knock one of them down, and when they kind of ambushed me one day, I wasn't going to tell him that my victory was very short lived or that I'd tried to use my karate knowledge to pick on another worm of a kid in our neighborhood. I still burned with shame over that event, and I knew I would never do that again. Keep on it, Kevin. The thing you need to remember is that you won't always be around these bozos. Unfortunately, you're stuck with them while you're going to school. But after that, college will really open your eyes to all the opportunities there are in the world. Uncle Henry's words really stuck with me. I hadn't really thought that once I was out of school that my world could possibly be different. But just entering the world of martial arts, I began to see that there were possibilities I'd never known about before. On the days when things seemed to be their worst, I kept telling myself that one day I'd meet people who didn't care that I couldn't play baseball, that I was always picked last for any team I'd ever been on. We all shed a few tears that Thanksgiving Day, each of us missing Dad in our own unique way. But for the first time since the funeral, I realized whether I liked it or not, life was moving on and I had to make something out of it. I could certainly go on missing Dad, but I also had to make a life for myself, and learning karate had come along just when I was searching for something to fill the emptiness. That had defined my life since his death. After dinner, Uncle Henry and I retired to the living room to snooze and watch football while we listened to the chatter of female voices coming from the kitchen with its amazing smells and emanating from the room. Auntie always made a turkey soup from the carcass of the bird, and I knew she had already started cooking it as they cleaned up from dinner. We would feast on leftovers tomorrow and then Saturday come back over for soup, as was our tradition for as long as I can remember. Shortly after Thanksgiving, Mum asks, "What do you want for Christmas, Kevin?" I hadn't really given it much thought. We'd gotten through Thanksgiving without my dad pretty well, but I was really dreading Christmas without dad. I don't know. I could tell Mum had something she wanted to talk to me about, and talking about Christmas presents was just her way of getting the conversation started. She waited patiently for me to speak, but I really had no ideas. Do you want to tell me what those dents are in the hallway are about? Of course she wanted to see them. Of course she would see them. How could she not? I punched the wall because I was mad. Mum nodded. You know we're going to have to fix those, don't you? Yeah, Mum. The truth was, I had taken to punching the walls when I came home to vent my ever simmering anger. It took less and less to set me off anymore. I'd actually punched a hole in the wall of my room the other day. Maybe Mum had seen that one. When I was at the dojo, I'd have a go at the great huge bag hanging in the corner. It was so scrawny that my punches and kicks didn't even move that behemoth. But I'd watched some of the older black belts come in and practice on the bag. Their kicks and punches certainly moved that bag. That's what I wanted to be able to do. It should have been no surprise to me that Mom gave me a canvas bag. I knew it was expensive for her, but she probably figured that it was less costly than repairing for walls of her house. The side effect from this gift was that I overcame another fear that I had always held, being in the basement. For as long as I can remember, I'd always been uncomfortable down in the basement of our house. But we had no other place in the house where we could set up my new canvas punching bag. It wasn't quite as massive as a heavy bag in the dojo, but it was a good start for me. We cleared an area in the basement, and with Uncle Henry's help, we hung my punching bag in one corner of my space. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a space of my own. It wasn't much to look at. It was your typical cellar, dark and dank, with only one little window high up in the wall. But for my purposes, it provided privacy and a place to work out, even when I wasn't at the dojo. I wasn't totally dedicated to karate yet, but I knew that I liked the feeling of competence it gave me. It was something I could do and feel good about myself. My basement studio became my heaven. I still had some dark and dangerous thoughts and feelings, especially if I'd been picked on at school. But now, instead of coming home and destroying Mum's house, I would head directly to the basement and punch in that punching bag until I was literally bending it in half. I'd do this for almost an hour every evening because I had that much anger built up inside of me. Even if I'd worked out at the dojo, my anger kept me company. I would compartmentalize it while I was in my karate classes because I was in a safe environment and always learned something new. But once I got home, my emotions would spill out, and having no other outlet, I'd punch my punching bag until I finally exhausted my quota of anger for the day. I didn't really talk to anyone about my anger. It was just as difficult to describe to Mum and Uncle Henry or any of my teachers as it was to tell anyone that I was being bullied. I felt somehow that there was something wrong with me, that I was deficient in some way. I didn't see other people walking around with this constant anger in their hearts, but I suspect I was able to hide it pretty well myself. No one ever really knew I was angry until I let loose in something like a wall or a punching bag. When Dad died, I had determined that anger was better than sadness. So I was probably coping with my grief by just allowing anger to come to the surface rather than sadness. The last thing I needed was for one of my tormentors to see me crying because I missed my dad. Life was tough enough already. I didn't need people to know I was a weakling and a sissy on top of it all. The rest of the school year zoomed by with the only a couple of truly remarkable events. The first was being called into my counselor's office one day. Kevin. He was looking at a paper on his desk rather than looking at me. It's come to my attention that Tommy Mason has been bothering you. Why couldn't he just say it for what it was? He was bullying me. But I just kept my mouth shut. For all I'd been through, I knew it was a whole lot worse if word got out that I ratted anyone out. My silence made him look up at me. I know you've been taking karate lessons. Why don't you just show him you know how to defend yourself now? Me? Defend myself against a wall of a kid like Tommy Mason. He was living in a different world than I was. He was expecting an answer, and all I could do was shake my head. I didn't know the answer to that. Sure, I was taking karate and I'd managed to get Tony off my back, but after trying to beat up the other last pick of the neighborhood and being bested by him, I hadn't tried my karate techniques on anyone outside the dojo. I think I'd figured that my success over Tony had just been a fluke. Well, it kept him from bothering me. It hadn't prevented him from gathering the forces and getting other people to mess with me. They were even going so far as to throw things at Mum's car and the house at night. Mum would just clean it up, her lips tight with disapproval. But she knew that there was nothing we could do to stop them unless we caught them. They knew that I knew, and that was enough for them. Karate was great for my self-esteem, but it hadn't totally taken care of my bullying problem. I had no answer for my counselor, and this question stayed with me for a long time. Then, right at the end of this year in homeroom, Tommy Mason and Don Blaylock got into a fight. Our teacher had stepped out of the room, and I'm not quite sure what set it off. I was just glad that it wasn't the one. I wasn't the one on the receiving end of the punches. Tommy looked like an onion with his white hair and his roly-poly body, wide in the middle and tapered at the top. Everyone in class could see that because he was worked up because his face was so red it was almost purple. Don was about the same size as Tommy, so it was finally like he was picking on someone his own size. It was over in a matter of minutes, but Don beat the crap out of Tommy. After I got over being afraid that he'd go after me next, I actually felt good that someone had taken care of Tommy. I had my blue belt by this time, and I still didn't feel like I could have taken Tommy in a fight. Interesting, Interestingly enough, after Don beat him up in front of the entire homeroom, he just stopped bullying people. For the last few weeks of school, I continued to give wide Tommy wide berth, but like a beaten dog. I gradually felt confident walking past him without worrying whether he would just knock my boots out of my hand or get me in a chokehold until I gurgled. That summer I turned 14. I learned a lot of things. I discovered weightlifting, a new friend, girls, and alcohol. And that is the end of chapter 10. Yeah, chapter 10. Okay.